Good evening, everyone. I'm very excited to welcome you to the West Side Democrats Mayoral Forum for the primary in June of My name is Alec Barrett, and I'm a district leader with the West Side Democrats. I will be moderating tonight's forum along with two co-hosts, Lauren Brody, our interim vice president of the club, and Pablo Zavaios. I want to hand over the floor to club president Richard Oppenheimer to say a few words.
Richard, I think you're still on mute. 1 second, we gotta.
Excuse me, welcome everyone to the West Side Democrats Mayoral Forum. This is the first in a series concerning the 2021 New York City elections. In the coming days, we will be hosting phone banks for the senatorial races in Georgia. So watch out for our emails and sign up. And join the West Side Democrats at our webpage. And this is going to be an exciting evening. And here is our host, District Leader in the 69th AD, Alec Barrett.
Thank you, Richard. Tonight, the candidates will have 6 minutes to speak, to introduce themselves and talk about their platform. We'll then have 3 minutes of Q&A, during which time I, Lauren, and Pablo will pose questions to the candidates. If you have a question that you'd like to ask, you can send us a message in the chat, and we will try and ask as many questions as we can during the 3 minutes of Q&A. Tonight does not have any particular focus, but I want to highlight a few issues that are obviously on the minds of West Siders, including housing and homelessness, transportation and the way we use our streets, public safety and policing, and of course, COVID recovery, including all of the economic and educational implications of that process. I will signal for candidates when they have 1 minute left in their 6 minutes to introduce themselves. I also want to briefly mention that this primary will be one of the first to use ranked choice voting in New York City, which means that you'll have the chance not just to vote for one candidate, but to rank as many of the candidates as you like in your order of preference. So as you're listening to candidates tonight, remember, the choice is not just who your one favorite is, but how you prefer them. And when you have the chance to vote in June, you will be voting under the ranked choice voting system. I also want to briefly acknowledge our Upper West Side's own Assembly member, Linda Rosenthal. In particular, today is her birthday, so we wish a very happy birthday to Assembly member Linda Rosenthal. And with that, we'll turn the floor over to Eric Adams, our first candidate, the Brooklyn Borough President, followed by Q&A, which Lauren will moderate.
Unmute.
Hello, am I coming through clear?
You are, thank you.
No, thank you. First of all, a happy birthday to Linda, and really thank you to West Side Democrats. It's not a secret that after your three clubs merge, you are clearly a force to be reckoned with, an important voter bloc on the Upper West Side. And I really want to thank you for the work you've done around the presidential election, many phone banks, many phone calls. Your club has been just really amazing. So just job well done. I think we all breathe a sign of relief. But let's not kid ourselves. Anxiety still exists here in the city. And I think about a few weeks ago, speaking with the partnership, equating the anxiety that I'm feeling to the time that I dropped my son off to school. I remember dropping him off to American University and speaking to one of the heads at the school for about 20 minutes. And after questioning him over and over again, he placed his hands on my shoulders and he said that, Eric, I just dropped my daughter off to school in Carolina. And I smiled and I said, he gets it. he understands that although Jordan has hair on his face, his voice is deeper, he's still my baby, he's still my son. And I can't place my hands on your shoulders, but I want you to tell you I get it. I get it that we're watching our city erode backwards. I get it that you walk out your door and you're seeing people insert needles in their arms and urination and other things in the streets that we have not witnessed in a long time. I get it that our shops are closing. Many people are feeling as though they're unemployed. They may lose their homes or their apartments. I get it that you're picking up the paper and you're reading about a gunshot on the corner that you walk your family across a day before. I get it that we have graffiti everywhere. Trash pickup is not here. And there's just a level of uncertainty on how we're going to keep our schools open or closed. I get it, understanding the real way. And I know that we're much better as a city. And we need to understand right now at the heart of our cities are made up of agencies. And if the agencies are not doing their job, it doesn't matter how much money we place in our city, that dysfunctionality is going to exist. And the inefficiencies we see every day is leading to inequalities. I believe we run this city and cities all across America in the spirit of Archbishop Desmond Tutu. He stated, we spend a lifetime pulling people out of the river. No one goes upstream and prevent them from falling in the first place. That's what we do in New York. We are not only not preventing people from falling in many cases, we're pushing them in. How do we have a Department of Health and Mental Hygiene that is trying to stop childhood obesity, childhood diabetes, childhood asthma? Yet we're feeding our babies 960,000 meals a day in the Department of Education. Those meals cause childhood obesity, childhood diabetes, childhood asthma. How do we have a health and hospital system that only treats underlying causes to diseases and not lifestyle medicine, a program that I have at Bellevue Hospital where we're cycling people off of medicine? How do we have an educational system that has historically failed to educate Black and brown boys year after year? 80% of the men and women at Rikers Island upon entry don't have a high school diploma or equivalency diploma. Or why do we fail to test for dyslexia? If it's true with one study in Texas, 40% of the children at Rikers Island potentially are dyslexia. When you look at our cities and our agencies, the inability to coordinate together provides a level of failure that we are witnessing throughout our entire city. You're doing your job as taxpayers. We're not doing our job as effectively running our city. And it hurts the most, those inner city communities. I love the city and I know it well. I know what works and what doesn't. And I spent my entire life helping people who have lived the life I lived as a child. And it was not always easy. There were many days growing up in South Jamaica, Queens, after we left Brooklyn. I recall bringing a garbage bag full of clothing to my school because we were afraid we were going to be thrown out. It was challenging, it was difficult, but we had people who loved us and cared. And I'm saying to you that it is time for us to unify and unite as one city. We're so much better than what we are observing. And I want to be the mayor to bring us together, but also to bring that efficiency so we no longer have to have the inequalities that we're witnessing throughout our entire city. I went through a lot. It's time to have a mayor that has gone through a lot that can help people who are now going through a lot. Thank you very much for allowing me to come in and speak with you. I'll answer any questions that you have.
Thank you so much. So we're going to start with a question from Steve Anderson, which is, how do you believe your experience as an NYPD police officer for 20 years would be of value should you be elected our next mayor?
Well, it's actually, Stephen, it's 22 years. You know, don't take those two from me. Well, when I came into the police department, as a computer programmer. I was a police officer special assignment, different city at the time. Every car had a no radio sign. People used to pull their radios out because they thought someone was going to destroy their cars when they wanted to return to them. And I was a small team of officers that were put in place to start the first of its kind data usage and processing. We went from being reactive to proactive to predictive to deal with public safety. And in the process, we learned how to bring down crime. And it became a prerequisite to prosperity in the city, which I believe is public safety. But I see us slipping backwards, and we need to be extremely alarmed about that. In my experience as a person who spent 22 years fighting for safety, but justice at the same time, I believe we could be safe and we could have the justice that we deserve. And when you understand how policing is a noble profession, and it's unfortunate that police agencies are not doing a good job, particularly in New York City, of weeding out those officers who are not suitable to lift up the nobility of a profession that I love and I think is important. I am going to use my experience to make sure we identify those officers who are not suitable to have the right to be police officers, but at the same time, we're going to change the ecosystem of public safety to be more proactive and not reactive.
Thank you so much. Our next question is, let's see, sorry. We're going to give a question on housing from Carlton Burrows, and it's why is nothing being done, about the corruption at HPD and the use of pension fund money in predatory lending schemes?
Well, if you are clear on some specific items of corruption, I think you should report it to the proper agencies that are responsible for investigating that. Where I believe we are failing is in NYCHA and real affordable housing, and how do we use our zoning tools and abilities to start upzoning throughout the city. We all must share the burden of affordable housing, and I think it has been disproportionately placed in just some communities that has led to gentrification, and that must change. The problem of affordable housing is a citywide problem, and the entire city should play a role in ensuring that we have affordability and when we have high transit areas, areas that are already doing well. Let's share that prosperity to all the residents of the city. We have one city, one problem that we need to solve, with all of us coming together, solving that problem of affordable housing and affordability.
Thank you so much, President Adams. I think that is all the time we have for now. We have to get on to our next candidate. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you. Take care.
Next up, I'd like to introduce Sean Donovan, the former Secretary of the Department of Housing and Urban Development in Washington, and also Director of the Office of Management and Budget. Sean, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
Happy birthday, Linda. Congratulations, and congratulations to the club for all the work you did to make sure that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris will take the White House in just a few months. I'm running for mayor because I grew up as a lifelong New Yorker in a different time of crisis. As a child, I watched homelessness explode on our streets as I walked to school or to my mother's apartment on West 70th Street. I watched neighborhoods burning and crumbling in the South Bronx and other communities of color around the city. And it lit a fire in me to go to work rebuilding my city. I started volunteering at a homeless shelter in college. And then after school, I came back to work for a nonprofit in the Bronx to rebuild those same neighborhoods I'd seen burning as a child. That began a 30-year career of public service on the front lines of housing and homelessness and racial and economic justice. I was honored to serve as the housing commissioner for the city, and then to be appointed by President Obama as housing secretary. I was literally there to help turn on the lights at the beginning of the Obama administration, and I was there on the very last night as well. In fact, I was standing with the Obamas on the Truman balcony, the very same place that Donald Trump returned from Walter Reed Hospital and ripped off his mask. I, in part, am running for mayor because I watched our public service turned these last 4 years into self-service. President Trump has made each of us around this country and on this call tonight look in the mirror and ask ourselves, what can we do to make this country a better place, to attack the systematic inequality and racism that we have seen unearthed by the leadership of President Trump? I believe that I am the best candidate to lead this city in this moment because I combine the biggest, broadest vision for change with the deepest experience and leadership in crisis. I believe I'm the true progressive in this race because on issues of deep inequality, whether it's homelessness, where I led the strategy under President Obama that reduced homelessness nationwide by about a quarter, reduced veteran homelessness by 50%, and working with the best mayors around the country, ended veteran and chronic homelessness in more than 80 cities and states. As HUD Secretary and Budget Director, I took on racial inequality. In fact, President Trump is attacking Joe Biden for destroying the suburbs because he wants to make sure Black and brown people can live anywhere they want. He's attacking him for my work that demanded every city, if they took federal dollars, must ensure that they are reversing the terrible toll of systematic racism and segregation. I was the first cabinet secretary in history to endorse marriage equality, and we did path-breaking work to bring equality to transgender people that laid the groundwork for the recent Supreme Court decision protecting their rights under the Fair Housing Act. All of those are examples of my true progressive leadership, not of talking or ideology, but of actually making progressive change that attacks the greatest challenges we're facing. I believe the next mayor of New York needs to repair, rebuild, and reimagine this city. First, we must begin by repairing our civic fabric. We need a mayor who's not going to demonize and divide New Yorkers. We need a mayor that will be a mayor for all New Yorkers, to bring us together and challenge us to begin the process of repairing and rebuilding this city together. I believe I bring the deepest experience in how to rebuild in times of crisis like this. President Obama called on me at the moment of our worst housing crisis of our lifetimes to rebuild our housing and economic system. He called on me when Sandy hit our shores to lead the federal response and recovery to rebuild this city better and stronger. And when Ebola struck and it threatened to become a global pandemic, I went to work side by side with our health and our military leaders to make sure that that threat didn't become a global pandemic that cost hundreds of thousands of American lives. And I was a budget director leading a $4 trillion budget that reduced the deficit faster than any time since World War II, while still investing in key progressive priorities. Finally, we must reimagine the city and take President Obama's advice when he said to us, never let a crisis go to waste. We can reimagine our right to shelter in New York City as a right to housing. We can reimagine our streets to be 21st century streets that allow us to walk and move in this city without cars dominating our streetscape. And we can reimagine our criminal justice system to make sure that everyone in our criminal justice system is seen as a consequence of a system that has focused on crime, not as a public health and community issue, but as simply a law enforcement issue. If we do all these things together, we can make this a city that works for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Pablo will pose the questions to you.
Thank you, Director Donovan, for your statement. We have, as you can imagine, a number of questions for you. My first question is, what is your position on the use of land banks to develop new affordable housing?
I believe land banks are a critically important example of the ways that we can ensure public ownership of land, whether it be in NYCHA and public housing, through nonprofit and other forms of shared ownership, ensure permanently affordable housing. In fact, I was a leader as HUD secretary in building a movement across the country that accelerated the development of land banks. So I believe it's an important tool to ensure long-term permanent affordability for housing in the city.
Great. Another question we have gotten is, and this is fusing a couple of questions together, how do we turn from the enduring cycles of homelessness, including criminalization of homelessness, to housing our most vulnerable populations, particularly Black and Latino New Yorkers, veterans, and others who are struggling to pay the rent?
Well, I know we can do this, as I said a moment ago, because I led the national strategy that dramatically reduced homelessness and ended veteran and chronic homelessness in more than 80 cities and states. First, it begins by reimagining our right to shelter as a right to housing. And we need to do this by bringing every part of our city government together. That's what I did as HUD secretary. If we believe that we're going to solve homelessness with homeless programs alone, we are destined to fail. Instead, we need to bring together our health, our labor, our criminal justice, and all of our systems to commit to solving it together. We need a discharge plan every time someone leaves Rikers or the mental health ward of a public hospital, to ensure we have a discharge plan that makes sure they have stable, permanent housing. And we need to reinvest in supportive housing at a much more dramatic scale. The irony of this is not only the human cost of homelessness is dramatic, but the fiscal cost as well. It's actually more expensive for someone to be living on our streets or in a shelter than it is to permanently house them. Why is that? Because they get their health care at an emergency room. They cycle through jails and psych wards and many, many other places that are dramatically more expensive in human costs as well as fiscal costs as well.
Thank you. Alec, do we have time for another question?
One more short one, if you've got it.
All right. One question in the chat. Do you support defunding the police?
I support reducing, reimagining, and reinvesting in our criminal justice system. I believe we ask our police to do too much. They shouldn't be policing the hallways of our schools. They shouldn't be charged with ensuring that the homeless get the mental health and other help that they need. Our open streets, 75% of our open streets around this city are the responsibility of the police. We need to reduce their role and focus them on guns and violent crime. And we need the accountability, transparency, and other steps that will ensure that They are focused with respect on rebuilding trust with communities. I know that we can do this because I was part of the 21st Century Policing Task Force under President Obama. President Obama was the first president in 50 years where we reduced the incarceration rate and the crime rate together. And I saw leaders, Black and brown leaders of police departments across this country, really reforming the culture of police through training and other critical steps. I'm the only candidate in this race that's worked with mayors around the country and around the world to reform these strategies in so many different areas. And I know that we can do it here. But we also need to look more broadly at our corrections system as well. We spend almost $600,000 a year per prisoner at Rikers and get terrible results. We need to make sure that we're taking that money and reinvesting it in programs like housing. When I was housing commissioner, we used our housing vouchers to help folks returning from Rikers, and the results were dramatic. More than 95% after a year were stably housed and hadn't reoffended, dramatically different from those who had simply been dropped off on a corner in Long Island City with a subway token. We know that we can make these changes because I've done them.
Thank you, Director Donovan. We are out of time. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
Great. Next up, I want to introduce Catherine Garcia, the former commissioner of the New York City Department of Transportation. Commissioner Garcia, the floor is yours.
Hi, how are you? Thank you for having me, and happy birthday, Linda. Many of you might already know me as the go-to crisis manager for New York City. I did serve as food czar during the pandemic and distributed more than 130 million meals to vulnerable New Yorkers. That was really something that was shocking at how much need there was, but also always heartwarming to know that you were making a difference every day during the pandemic. I served as the interim chair of NYCHA and led czar, stepping in to overcome the decades of disinvestment in public housing and years of neglect and childhood lead exposure. On my watch, the number of children with elevated blood lead levels dropped by more than 20%. You also might know about my very long career in public service in New York City. I was responsible for making sure that clean drinking water was delivered to your home under Mayor Bloomberg, so you all could get up and brush your teeth. And as commissioner of sanitation in the largest waste organization in the country and the world. I am also a lifelong New Yorker, sort of raised on the streets, educated in the public schools, and it's where I chose to raise my family. They actually ended up going to the same elementary school as I did and did have some of the same teachers. And I believe we will recover better than ever. And I'm committed to getting the work done to make sure that happens on day one. When it comes to economic recovery, we are going to have to embrace what has always been the strength of New York City, our tough, resourceful, and creative people. But we need an experienced hand on the wheel. This is no time to learn on the job, and that's why I'm running for mayor. And the fact is, you won't find a candidate with more executive and hands-on municipal crisis management experience than what I have. And I want to briefly tell you today about my priorities for the city on day one, starting with COVID recovery. It has been extraordinarily concerning where the numbers are going in the last few days, and we are going to have to double down on what we have been doing since April, which is, well, actually not in April because we were told not to wear a mask in April, but since they told us to wear a mask, to make sure we are wearing our mask, to make sure we are staying socially distant, and particularly that we are protecting the most vulnerable among us. But as we think about the future, one thing is very clear. We need to make sure that there is fast, free, and easy access to the COVID vaccine. By the time your new mayor is sworn into office in January 2022, we will have a vaccine. We're going to have a vaccine before the end of this year, just not enough doses. And the most important step to our recovery is for every New Yorker to have fast, free, easy access. I'm an operations person. This is what I do best. I will build on the infrastructure to dispense the vaccine, similar to what was done with H1N1, leveraging schools, urgent care centers, mobile vans, as well as traditional doctor's office to make sure every New York is vaccinated. We will take a public health focused risk management approach to reopening to restore confidence, including clear guidance for businesses that set a new standard for how New Yorkers and small businesses interact with city government. One of the challenges on the reopening is we have used sometimes a sledgehammer rather than a scalpel. It is clearly more dangerous to be in an indoor restaurant than it is to be in a museum. And we need to make sure that we are opening as much as possible, but in a safe way. We have to support our most vulnerable New Yorkers with meaningful economic relief. We are in a childcare crisis. When you hear that 1 in 4 women are considering stepping back from their careers today because of the challenge of COVID and Zoom school and managing that going forward, it's why I'm proposing free childcare for ages 1 to 3 for all families with incomes less than $70,000. We need to double down on creating a pipeline from CUNY into our private sector, whether or not they want to graduate into a career in fashion or finance or the legal profession. But we also need to make sure that we are using our trade schools. There are many middle-class jobs in the building trades, as well as with agencies across the city. And as everyone has learned, as we Zoom again today, universal broadband is not a nice to have. We have to convert broadband into a public good and cut what has been the challenges, whether or not that is economic for people, or is that we're missing the fiber or the cable in that last mile. But most importantly, we have to prioritize core services to make sure that New Yorkers feel safe getting back to work and deliver them in the most efficient way possible. We need to make sure New Yorkers feel safe on our subways, and they're really very clean right now. They need to feel safe on their streets and make sure that everyone feels safe going back to work. We need to fiercely protect core services such as sanitation, fire, the parks department, our water system, and education, and stop wasting resources on ineffective Band-Aid solutions for social services. Protecting core services will also bring back tourism and employment. That said, we know tax revenue is down and we can't afford to be wasteful. I'm going to streamline agencies, commissions, offices, and everything in between so that your government is laser focused and tightly managed. Best thing for small businesses is a functioning city, clean and safe, where transportation is running. These basic services are the bedrock of a healthy commercial corridor.
Thank you, Commissioner Garcia. Great, thank you so much. I want to make sure we have time to field some questions from our audience members. One question is about filming and its effect on parking in neighborhoods like the Upper West Side. When a movie or TV show takes over several blocks, usually, parking is thrown off for the many residents who have cars that they keep on the street. What's your position on filming and TV specifically? And do you have broader thoughts about the parking situation in Manhattan?
So one of the more interesting things about what has happened in COVID is how effective open dining and open restaurants that have used the parking lanes has been to bring back our vitality. I support the film industry. It is one of the fastest growing industries in the city of New York. I also live in a neighborhood that is constantly being filmed, and it is something that we work around. There are things that I would like to look at in terms of residential parking permits to make it so that folks are not driving in to park their cars and then hop on the subway to go downtown.
Great, thank you. And let me ask you about the city's budget, and in particular, the possibility that if a Republican controlled Senate doesn't send us the aid we need, the city could be in a very challenging fiscal position.
I have actual a lot more confidence that we will get some relief from DC with the Biden administration. I know that the Republican Congress will probably not be nearly as generous as a Democratic Senate would have been, or maybe. I'm sending a lot of my money personally to Georgia right now. It seems to increase the number of emails I get, but it won't be enough to close every gap. And so some of the things you need to think about streamlining city services is there is a chief digital technology person, there is a chief cybersecurity person, there's a chief of data analytics, and there's a commissioner of information and technology. You don't need that many. You don't need a separate office for climate and a separate office for resiliency. Those can be collapsed into each other. And I've actually never understood what the public engagement unit did. So there are things we need to be very focused on so that we can spend money on things like our parks, DOE and the education system, our water system going forward. As many of you who are older may remember, in the 70s, when the Financial Control Board came through and just cut everything across the board, it took us longer to recover, because nobody's going to make investment in a new small business if they don't think that their customers are safe and they don't think the streets are clean.
Thank you. Sort of on the subject of government spending, we have just a few seconds left, but do you support keeping or abolishing the office of the public advocate?
Well, I love Germani, but it is an office in which it was designed during that charter commission many moons ago to deal with the fact that there had been someone who was in charge of the Board of Estimate, and how would you deal with that? So I think I'd love to keep Germani in that role, or if he has other roles that he would like to pursue, but it is a question of, do you need that ombudsman at that scale?
Great. Well, thank you so much, Commissioner Garcia. We appreciate your comments. Next, I want to introduce Carlos Menchaca, who is a city council member from Brooklyn, and Lauren will moderate the Q&A.
Thank you, Alec. Hi, everyone. Buenas noches. So good to be here with the West Side Democrats. I'm Carlos Menchaca from Brooklyn, council member representing District 38. And I'm here to talk to you a little bit about my mayoral run. And I know it's been a recent moment for me to come out and join the candidates, but I think it's been an incredibly important year for us, not just at the national level, and I know the dust is settling on our big win as Democrats, but also in this city. COVID has changed everything, not just for me and my family and probably yours, but for the entire city. And what I want to bring is a whole different way of thinking about government that starts with community. I've been a city council member representing Sunset Park and Red Hook, and so much of what I have learned about what a mayor can and can't do has been in fights with this administration. His entire time has been really removing power from communities to make decisions that are best for them, and in coalition with other neighborhoods. So what I want to do is really change that opportunity and give people the power. I've been in the council for 7 years now and have been part of budgets and negotiating budgets and how we can bring social services into our communities. I know that housing and homelessness is a big issue for so many communities, but I definitely know that the West Side is experiencing them now. I think we can deal with them differently. So much of what I've learned about homelessness and housing, I've learned through what we're doing in Sunset Park. In Sunset Park right now, we have approved 2 100% affordable housing projects that are going to be incredibly affordable. Those are the kind of things that I want to do as mayor, is to really think about how we bring the resources of the capital budget so that we can bring affordability, true affordability, to our communities, and not wait for towers of housing to come with luxury housing that can displace our communities. Those are conversations that we can have in our community and that do happen in our community, but they don't reach the power at the city level with these city agencies, with city planning and the mayor. I want to change that. We're also having some big discussions about public safety. And I'd love to kind of hear from you, and maybe the questions will kind of talk a little bit about maybe what you're thinking about public safety, but we haven't had a real conversation. The polarized discussion has left us, I think, in a terrible place as a city. What I want to do is really open up discussions to neutralize this topic and allow us as communities to talk about what it means for us to feel safe and how we can bring different sides of these discussions so that we can move forward. One of the things that's important is that I've been the chair of the Immigration Committee. I've learned a lot about how immigrants are the backbone of this community, of my community, but this city, and really bringing them at the center of how we rebuild our economy. Worker cooperatives, day laborers, the incredible work that our essential workers have done. These are folks that have not gotten any stimulus, and I want to make sure that we think about them and take care of them. My work will really center them. And finally, and then I want to really hand it back to you all for questions. Participatory budgeting has been this really interesting project that I think can be really enhanced and integrated into zoning, into larger budget projects, where the community can really make decisions and remove the political heads like council members and others from those discussions and allow you to make that decision and bring you at the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars to the community to make decisions. That's what you're going to see as part of my administration. And now I'll hand it back to you all for questions.
Thank you so much, Councilmember.
Thank you, Lauren.
We're going to start with a question on housing.
Yes.
If elected mayor, how do you plan to improve housing affordability for all residents from low income, but also for middle and moderate income young people, households and families?
So there's two things that I'll say. One is, I think you're going to get a lot of interesting ideas from this campaign trail, and I want to look at all of them, not just the ones that come from my team, but I want to look at all of them. Two is the work that I just talked about in Sunset Park. We really worked hard to build 100% affordable. That brings the affordability down. The AMI conversation is something that we have to look at. But in Sunset Park, those units went so low in terms of access that it really it's allowing for local residents that live in the community board to be able to access them with priority from the local community board. Now, what I want to introduce, and this is kind of connected to the homelessness conversation, but the universal basic income topic that came up in the presidential that kind of didn't go anywhere, I want to bring it here to the city of New York. I want to really create pilot programs so that we can actually experiment with people who might need a little bit more to be able to pay for rent. This is something that I think can really change how people access not just housing, but all the things that they need. And those are all that I just talked about as part of the affordability for families and for young people.
Thank you so much. Our next question, we had a few variations on this.
Okay.
Essentially, one elected official does not work alone, even as mayor of the entire city. Can you speak a little bit about how you would work with other city and also potentially state elected officials in order to govern effectively?
Absolutely. So I know we're not seeing this right now with our leaders of the state and the city. The mayor and the governor, I think, represent some of the worst kind of politics. And I think what you can do is just look at most recently, if you followed the industry city conversation, if you followed that, you saw a real contentious conversation there that was a 7-year in the making dilemma for the neighborhood. And what I did was spend 7 years talking to a lot of people, briefing a lot of people, engaging not just the residents of my community, but all the elected officials, from the Congress member to the state elected officials, and always kept them abreast of all the things that were happening in this rezoning that I knew was going to be contentious. And at the end, you saw an incredible alignment that I don't think we've seen before in this moment of saying no to a massive development that even the Post and the Daily News were saying, hey, this is an important thing to pass because of all the jobs. We did our homework, but I also shared that homework with transparency. And I created this coalition. That's how I'm going to run this mayor's office. I'm going to be transparent. I'm going to talk to people about all the things that and we're going to show the work about how we get to a decision so that everybody understands where we get to. And I feel like that is not happening with some of our state officials, and I want to change that.
Thank you so much. Another question we had was regarding the current situation with small businesses and small property owners. How do you plan to address the shift from even more so now to online than ever before and away from brick and mortar retail and the vacant spaces that we now have all over the city, but we especially see them on the west side here?
And you're probably talking about some of the retail ground floor commercial vacancies.
And just to add that there was kind of a two-parter was added about your stance on zoning flexibility and regulation.
Zoning flexibility and regulation. Okay, so let's pull this apart because I think you also said online and how things are kind of shifting online and what happens to the local mom and pop. I think this is a big issue that we've been feeling for a long time. And I want to say, as a resident of Red Hook, I live in Red Hook, the last mile delivery boom has caused for new warehouses to get built. So UPS and Amazon just bought a whole piece of property here that's going to bring last mile delivery for any one of us in the millions of people in the city of New York that are ordering online. I think there's some real review that we have to have with environmental impacts that are going to really cause issues, not just for Red Hook, but for others with the massive amount of trucks that are going to be delivering things. I think we have to have an honest conversation in the city about what that means and how we can really utilize those commercial properties as places for inventory and engagement and entrepreneurship. I think retail is changing. COVID is going to change that for a long time, which is why we said no to Industry City, because of the retail nature of that project. And I don't think that the commercial developers have understood that. But we understand that because we live in our neighborhoods. So I'm welcoming ideas that you might have on the west side that will show how we can shift the use of property for other things. Some cool things that I've heard on the ground with.
I don't mean to cut you off. We're just at time, and there are so many of you. But thank you so much.
Sorry. Okay. One last thing: commercial property, open, vacant, schools. How can we use that for school instruction? That's all. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you so much.
More questions, or that's it?
That's it. Unfortunately, we're just at time. Thank you so much.
So good to meet you all. Good night.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Council Member. We are halfway through our candidates. I just want to take a quick moment to acknowledge elected officials from around the city and borough who have joined us. In particular, we want to say thanks to Assemblymember Linda Rosenthal, who I gather wasn't here to get the birthday greetings we sent her earlier, but a very happy birthday to the West Side Democrats' very own Assemblymember Linda Rosenthal. We also want to acknowledge and thank Councilmember Helen Rosenthal and district leaders and state committee members from all over Manhattan who are here with us. Thank you very much for joining us. Next up, we have Diane Morales, who is a nonprofit executive, most recently CEO of the social services organization FIPS Neighborhoods. And I will turn the floor over to Ms. Morales.
Hi, good evening. First of all, thank you all for having me. Thank you to the West Side Democrats. It's great to have the opportunity to be here with you, tell you a little bit more about myself and why I think I'm the best candidate for New York City Mayor. So I'm a lifelong New Yorker. My parents met here, they fell in love here, they raised their family here, and I raised my children here as a single mom. I love New York City, And like all of you, or many of you, I'm sure, I believe it's the greatest city in the world. But like many of us also, I know that we're falling short. I actually first became aware of that as a student at Stuyvesant High School. My parents had believed wholeheartedly in the American dream, and I fell for it. You know, the idea that if we studied and worked hard, that we would do better than they did. And I studied and worked hard, and I found myself at Stuyvesant High School, although quite frankly, I had no idea what that meant or what it was. But it wasn't until I went to Stuyvesant, actually, after growing up in Bed-Stuy, that I became aware that I was poor. And, you know, I visited friends at the time, actually, in the Upper West Side. And that was one of the things that made me aware of some of the disparities and the inequities, in addition to just seeing a lot fewer kids that looked like me or came from communities like mine as I went along my educational career and had increasing access to elite institutions. So I didn't always have the analysis, but I knew from a young age that I wanted to create change. I thought it was important to level the playing field because I didn't think that I was any more special or smart than a lot of the kids that I'd grown up with in Bed-Stuy, but I knew that they hadn't had access. And so I spent the early part of my career really sort of searching for an entry point so that I could make a difference. I started off as a caseworker in a foster care agency right here in New York City. And after that, I ended up as a special education teacher at the same public school where I had first gone to kindergarten. And it was back then what was called a SIE 7 classroom. And I had no training. I was a per diem teacher in one of the most challenging classroom settings, but I had so much enthusiasm and so much commitment and so much passion. And I was full of questions on a daily basis and full of ideas about what I could do differently to reach my students and how I could help. And it was on a spring day when I went to my vice principal for the 40th time to propose an idea. And she looked at me and she said, I don't care what you do with those kids. Keep them in the classroom, keep the door shut, and keep them quiet. And it was on that day, in that moment, that I realized that if the fate of our children was in the hands of people who just didn't care, I needed to do something different. And so I embarked on sort of a journey to try to figure out how I could come back and have an impact at a larger scale. I went to Columbia University and got a master's degree in social planning. I attended a doctoral program at the Harvard Graduate School of Education and got a degree in administration and social policy. I spent my career searching for how I could do that. I established a national organization called Jumpstart that provides early literacy skills to preschool children in 14 states. We just celebrated our 27th anniversary. I've also created housing programs for homeless LGBTQ youth and youth aging out of foster care. I've provided services to those suffering from mental illness and substance abuse. And I've built cross-sector partnerships with healthcare and higher education institutions that actually provided access to transformative careers to people who were formerly living in poverty. And yet, despite all of that, I was increasingly frustrated because even before the multiple crises of the last 8 months, women were still making 88 cents to the dollar compared to their white male counterparts. And when you think about women of color, that ratio is even worse. And Latina youth and LGBTQ youth's suicide ideation rates are at epidemic proportions. And when you think about residents of highly policed communities, more than 4 times of those folks reflect being harassed by the police, and 58% actually report being unsafe, feeling unsafe as a result of the over-policing. So I'm running for mayor of New York City because while I had a hope, we had hope last week for a national level, change, our fight is far from over because a system that works for some of us is not good enough. I really believe in the power of democracy and participation, and that government should belong to all of us. Now is not the time. Now is the time for us to keep pushing forward, because the multiple crises that we've been navigating are the symptoms of deeply ingrained systems and structures. And we've got to ensure that we continue to move forward and address the root causes of that disease. We cannot be lulled or managed into complacency. We cannot go back. We've got to live up to the rhetoric of being the greatest city in the world, and the people closest to the problem are closest to the solution. We're ready for a radical reimagining of our city, and it's time to throw out the old playbook, because the intersection of these crises have created a unique and unprecedented opportunity for us to respond to this clarion call and this moral imperative. We've got to have the courage to suspend disbelief and imagine new possibilities. I know it, I've done it. We're New York City, and we should be a model for equity and justice for the rest of the country and the world.
Thank you very much, Ms. Morales. I'll turn it over to Pablo for the Q&A.
Hi, Ms. Morales. My first question for you is this. Do you support transitioning NYCHA, or working, of course, with other levels of government to do this, to transitioning NYCHA to a resident-owned and managed structure?
Absolutely. I was worried there for a second that you were going to go to private. But yes, I do believe that NYCHA, with the right supports, should be handed over to community ownership. We should be moving towards a green infrastructure. We should be providing jobs to community members, residents of NYCHA, to help bring about those changes and rebuild the infrastructure of NYCHA. We should absolutely, not just with NYCHA actually, with housing overall across the city, we should be adopting models that increase community ownership and community decision-making over the fate of their own housing.
Great, thank you. Another question I received: how would you go about improving and integrating New York City's public school system?
That's a great question. And I will tell you about a missed opportunity that I feel like we've had actually in the midst of this pandemic. With the adopting of virtual learning and virtual classrooms, there are lots of different things that we could have done. There's no reason why we could not have begun to experiment with desegregating classrooms with the virtual model. There's no reason why the best teacher on the Upper East Side could not have a classroom that was comprised of students from the South Bronx and from Brownsville, as well as the Upper East Side. Virtual learning right now has provided us with the opportunity to do away with the geographic boundaries that have bound us and maintained desegregation in our public schools. I think there's something to be learned from that opportunity in order to begin to desegregate our classrooms and provide a different level of quality education to all of our students.
Thank you. And another question here that we have, how do you think that we can use the $157 million allocated for broadband in the most efficient way possible to provide services to underserved communities across our city?
Well, that's a great question too. And as a matter of fact, I am a part of the leadership group of one of the largest mutual aid groups in New York City, Bed-Stuy Strong. And one of the things that we're doing in the community right now is using the volunteers that we have, who are many of whom are from the tech industry, to help build out the mesh infrastructure and working with private homeowners in areas surrounding where those antennas, I don't know the tech term for it, currently exist, so as to expand the network. And something like that is a model that we could actually implement citywide so that everyone has access to free public Wi-Fi.
All right, one more question here. So just 3 hours ago, you tweeted, "Now cancel rent and mortgages. Even with mortgage cancellation, how are small property owners supposed to survive? Mortgage is not an operating expense. Our biggest operating expense is city property taxes. They're taking this from a property owner, which make up 40% of the city budget. What are you going to do about property?"
Yep. So I am also a homeowner. I'm a small homeowner, and I understand that. I think that the city needs to find other ways to cover those expenses. We cannot put those burdens on small homeowners, but we do need to provide relief to the renters citywide, because it's a public health and a public safety issue. We cannot hold people accountable during this time of economic crisis for income and revenue that they do not have access to by threatening to evict them or make them homeless, which is only going to further compound the issues and the challenges that we're dealing with in the city. We have to find a way to help people remain in their homes, help mortgage holders, small home owners be able to also remain in their homes and take care of those property taxes using other sources, and not hold homeowners accountable for those expenses.
Thank you so much, Ms. Morales, for being with us and for answering our audience's questions.
Thank you very much, Pablo. It's nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. Now over to Alec.
Great, thank you. Before our next candidates, I just want to briefly reiterate what our club president said. If you like what you're seeing, if you like engaging on these issues and campaigning for progressive causes, please join the Westside Democrats. We'll post our information in the chat. We'd love to see you at our upcoming monthly meetings. Next up, I will turn over the floor to New York City Comptroller, Scott Stringer.
Well, thank you, Alec, and thank you, Pablo. Thank you, Westside Democrats. For me, this is somewhat of a homecoming because I started my political career on the Upper West Side in this very democratic club with so many of you. And as I travel around the city, now on Zoom, it's really great to be home tonight to talk to you about why I'm running for mayor. But of course, I have to initiate protocol. I want to congratulate and honor our Assemblywoman on her birthday, Linda Rosenthal, someone who I've had the honor of working with for decades and is one of the best elected officials in New York City. So shout out to Linda, happy birthday. So let's just take a moment and look at where we were in this city economically in February of 2020. We had a record low unemployment rate of 3.4%. And over the preceding 10 years, we added 970,000 jobs to the New York economy. When COVID hit in March, within 30 days, our unemployment rate went from 3.4% to over 20%, the highest it's ever been. Among young people and people of color, it was even higher. It was the depression that we always feared, but knew could never impact New York City. And COVID's impact has been felt in this economy in so many different ways. I'm running for mayor because I believe I have the vision and the skills to build back our city economically. Because the future of our city is about maintaining our value proposition. It's about making sure that we have the best schools for every child in every zip code in the city. It's about finally building low-income housing to meet the challenges of homelessness. It's about making sure that we have safe streets and we have a criminal justice system that is equal for everyone. The future of the city is about real leadership at a time when we finally need to wake up City Hall and move beyond the last 8 years into an administration that continues to be progressive, but maybe it's time for some competence and management. I believe very strongly that to run for mayor, you got to be specific because talk is cheap. New Yorkers want to know what the plan's going to be. As controller, I put out detailed plans to deal with some of our most difficult challenges. I have a 25-point plan to figure out how we bring back our small businesses post-COVID pandemic. We already saw pre-COVID the millions of square foot of vacant office and retail space in our city. In fact, I did the report that showed we doubled the amount of retail space in the last 10 years. Now we're up to 17 million. So we're gonna have to incentivize our small businesses to move to vacant corridors, and we're gonna have to protect our businesses and give them the credits they need to stay in business. We're gonna also have to make sure that we help our businesses expand their tech platform. In so many of our challenged communities and our immigrant communities, a tech platform doesn't exist, and we've got to go in and be proactive so that we can add to the revenue options for small businesses. We got to catalog where the challenges are and we got to get city agencies off their back. We got to end the expediters at the Department of Buildings, and we've got to create agencies that are actually promoting our small businesses. My plan would do that. I have a long-time plan for a universal affordable housing in this city, to use our vacant land, give that land to community-based organizations, to build the low-income housing we need so we can move people from homelessness into permanent apartments, so that we can help adults who suffer mental illness, who are languishing our streets, to give them an apartment with affordable services. I have a detailed plan to do that as well. I think we have to reimagine our streetscape. You know, mayors can advocate for subway help from the federal government, and we need $12 billion of transportation aid, but mayors run the streets, and we need to create a transportation system on our streets that include bike lanes and busways, and take advantage of outdoor retail and outdoor dining in a way that could transform our city in the post-COVID environment. Those are the plans that I've put forth, as well as a resiliency plan, not just to worry about Lower Manhattan and resiliency, but to create a plan for Main Street in the city. And so these are the things that I feel passionately about, but it's not just about planning, you actually have to implement. And I know that as a former state assemblyman, we're first gonna have to reset the city-state relationship in Albany. Let's face it, Bill de Blasio has been playing checkers with Andrew Cuomo for 8 years. Cuomo plays chess, he plays checkers. We need a new mayor who understands the dynamic in Albany, as I do. And I just want everyone to know tonight that no one is stealing my lunch money in Albany. We are going to get what we need by working with progressive legislators in Albany. I also know, and many of you know this, as borough president, I worked on land use and zoning issues, developed community-based planning, worked and improved our community boards, because the only way we're going to build out our city is if we build with communities, not against them. And that's why I've opposed the de Blasio rezonings. As controller, I fixed the back office fiscally and certified and created a pension system that would stand the test of time. But I also divested from private prisons, leading the divestment on climate and fossil fuel divestment, the first in the nation. I have used my office as a way of building a new way of thinking in terms of climate and the economy, and I've protected the pensions of 700,000 city workers. That's my solemn obligation. I want to make sure that we also have a real conversation about inequality. As many of you know, I lost my mom to COVID in a Bronx hospital. And what I learned that night, the night that she died, was that it wasn't just people in their 80s who were dying of COVID. It were people who had pre-existing health conditions, Black people and Latino people who were managing their diabetes and obesity, and the government was not investing in communities. So what we ended up doing was managing people's illnesses until COVID came and said, no, this virus discriminates. So when I open this economy as mayor, I'm not opening it the same way we closed it. We're gonna double down in the communities that struggle the most. We're gonna build the programs and build the protocols that are gonna lift up every single neighborhood, and no longer will we have a tale of two cities. We're finally going to have one city with one economic agenda that will benefit everybody, and shifting resources to the people who struggle. Let me just say to all of you who've known me a long time, many of you know I don't come from personal wealth. I'm a longtime government employee. So I always say to my two little kids, Max and Miles, my public school kids, third grader and second grader, I'm not gonna leave them a lot of money, but what I am gonna leave them is the greatest city on earth. That's what I wanna do as mayor. And I wanna do it for my kids and your kids, but mostly I wanna do it for the kids who are in homeless shelters, the kids who struggle, the kids who don't have access to remote learning or the internet. This is the moment that we can usher in a new government for real, progressive, competent change.
Thank you, Comptroller Stringer. I want to make sure we have time for questions. The first question we have gotten for you is relating to the city's climate goals and sustainability goals. Are we on track? And if not, what can we do about it?
Well, let's agree that anybody running for mayor or any other office who talks about climate goals into the years 2040 or 2050 is simply kicking the can down the road. Aspirational goals is fine, but what's happened in this administration is we have been too slow to realize our yearly goals, whether it's in the area of admissions or green jobs or how we create a green economy. That's going to change in the Stringer administration. We're going to have yearly goals on the green economy, on admission standards. We're going to have an 8-year plan to do my part in this area. I've already done it as city controller. You know, I've doubled the amount of green investment we have in the controller's office. We now spend $4 billion in investments in the green economy. I mentioned that we are going through right now a fossil fuel divestment plan, which would be the largest and most profound in the nation. That's real. It's actually happening. I think that we have to invest in a jobs program at NYCHA and in other developments to work to make sure that the laws we put in place are actually realized, and that we continue work on retrofitting and building out our city. I would immediately on day one have a fossil fuel, a fossil fuel infrastructure moratorium in this city. I've opposed the pipelines throughout New York. That's not the future. We need solar panels and batteries. We don't need waste stations that are only going to create more asthma and more disparity in our communities.
Great, thank you. The next question is on your proposal of land banks and whether this is realistic given the scarcity of development land, and are you concerned about private developers preparing to acquire city-owned land?
Well, it's our land and it's our city, and the taxpayers own hundreds and hundreds, up to 1,000 vacant properties. And I believe that as policy, the city should be giving that vacant land to the community-based organizations, the not-for-profits, to build the next generation of housing. That has to be our goal, because we have to build low-income housing. We have got to build housing for people who are in shelters, where we're spending billions of dollars. Think about this. In de Blasio's time as mayor, we went from spending $1.6 billion on homeless services up to $3.2 billion today. Yet we have more people who are homeless, more people living in the streets. We need to merge a real affordable housing plan with the reality of homelessness. And then we also have to shake off this plan that basically allowed luxury developers to build our affordable housing throughout the city. And it turned out that their version of affordable housing was unaffordable to the very people who lived in the neighborhoods. That was true in East New York. That was true in El Barrio. That's true in Washington Heights. We need a reset, and we need a mayor who understands that the way you build low-income housing is by coming up with a comprehensive plan with a subsidy that can get the AMI to reflect the actual income of a community. And that is the goal in my housing plan. But we're going to go a step further. We're going to build low-income housing, but then when it comes to as-of-right developments and luxury developments, I'm going to make sure that we pass a law that 25% of those luxury units are set aside for affordable housing. This will stand a court case, and this is something that we will do. So my plan is integrate communities by demanding 25% affordable in as-of-right developments, and also take advantage of our city-owned properties, let nonprofits build the housing. We've done this before. We have to go back into the housing business as a city.
Great. Thank you so much, Comptroller Stringer. We have got to move on to our remaining candidates, but we appreciate your being with us.
Thank you, Alex. Thanks, everybody.
Next up will be Lori Sutton, who is a former commissioner of the New York City Department of Veterans Services and is retired as a brigadier general in the U.S. Army. I will turn over the floor to Lori. Commissioner Sutton, I believe you should be able to unmute.
We're all set.
Great.
Thank you so much, Alec. It's great to be with you all this evening, and kudos to the West Side Democrat Club. I really appreciate all the work you're doing. And yes, Assemblywoman Rosenthal, happy birthday one more time. Tonight, I'm so delighted to be with you. I want to just tell you a little bit about who I am, what I stand for, a few of my priorities, and then I'll issue a challenge for all of us. First of all, why am I running for mayor? I'm running for mayor because I want to bring sanity and leadership to the city that I deeply love and respect. Leadership, 30 years of my life, I was privileged to serve in the United States Army. I became a general officer. I led in times of combat. I commanded hospitals. I'm a doctor as well. And as a psychiatrist, as the Army's leading psychiatrist, I developed the strategies for trauma, resilience, brain injuries, and traumatic brain injuries. I've led complex organizations during times of life and death with very, very critical public health missions. I have also served during these last 5 years as commissioner for the Department of Veteran Services. It was during that time that I had the privilege of covering every borough, every neighborhood, 500,000 veterans and their family members here in New York City. And of course, one of the big issues we took on was ending veteran homelessness. You heard earlier Sean talking about the great work he did, 50% nationally. Here in New York City, we brought that number down by 90%. And those innovations that we use to have that kind of an outsized impact here in New York City can be absolutely adapted and applied to the larger population. I want to tell you a little bit about my values. I think you need to know, what values undergird your mayor's core. What do I apply to my personal life? What do I apply to my professional decisions? Well, I lead with heart, honor, empathy, accountability, respect, and teamwork. Where do I draw my ideas from? Well, I carry around my briefcase. I'm very much drawn to the City Journal. I think the Manhattan Institute has done an amazing job with the kind of work and the kind of policy ideas that they've come out with on a variety of topics across the city. I don't agree with everything, but I'm always challenged. Kathy Wilde and her work, Partnership for New York City. Some of you may have seen the call for action and collaboration. Amazing, amazing work, an amazing blueprint that I think carries a lot of wisdom for us on the way forward. The Regional Plan Association, none of us right now, city or state, have everything that we need to move forward. But as a region, putting forward New Jersey, New York, and Connecticut, there's so much that we can and must do. As we've been reminded by the pandemic, viruses travel, they're, environmental issues cross districts, we share the same air. There's so much that we could do together. And that requires a kind of leadership that's very different than what we've seen from politics as usual. The kind of leadership that understands that personal differences don't matter. What matters is what's best for the people of New York, the people that we serve, the health and well-being. That leads to the next issue here in terms of priorities. I've learned a lot about homelessness. I've learned a lot about accessible and affordable housing these last several years, but I've also been just tremendously concerned about the process. When I look at what's happened over these last few weeks and months here in our city, and of course, you all know all too well that the process that took hundreds of homeless individuals and placed them without preparing you as community members, without preparing the homeless individuals themselves or the surrounding communities, that's just wrong. And it's pit New Yorkers against each other. It's been needlessly divisive. And I just, I will tell you with all my heart, community engagement, listening, education, feedback, that has to precede any sort of major shift in a community ecosystem in life. And I would promise that as mayor for sure. But getting back to COVID, I'll tell you, we've got a lot of work to do. Nothing will go forward in this city unless we restore safety. I've developed a safety triad: safe schools, safe streets, safe jobs. If we cannot demonstrate the ability to bring our communities, our protesters, our stakeholders, and yes, our law enforcement, our police department together, and to reimagine, reinvent, rebuild law enforcement, to make NYPD the finest and most trusted police force in the country, we will never draw back our fellow New Yorkers who currently read the news and see all of the spike in killings, the spike in murders, the spike in violence, and feel like, where's my city gone? I can't come back. Our mayor says now, who cares if you come back? We all should care, and we should all work like mighty to get our fellow New Yorkers back to work, to be able to support our police, and to be able to move forward, lead forward, and lift up going ahead. There's lots of things that we could talk about, but let me just say this. One thing I want to close with, because I want to leave plenty of time for questions. I think you ought to know who your mayor's heroes are. Who are the giants that I draw strength and wisdom and courage from? We got 5 great New Yorkers: Eleanor Roosevelt, Teddy Roosevelt, Shirley Chisholm, Bella Abzug, and yes, Mayor Koch. To mayor is to walk around. Mayor is a verb. And I look forward, as your mayor, if you so trust me with that responsibility, to being available, to listening, to innovating, to bringing communities together, and to understand that in this new world, any of us as leaders have to be able to leave the world that we lived in 9 months ago, leave it behind, and look at our city anew. And that's just a tremendous, tremendous privilege and responsibility, which leaves me with my last challenge. 3 out of 4 registered Democrat New Yorkers over the last several cycles have not shown up to vote in the local election to select mayors and city council members. Folks, many of them are now contacting me. They're saying, you know, I've done well in the city. I love the city, but I just never thought that who is mayor counts. Well, if this pandemic has taught us anything, in addition to the tattered social fabric and all that we need to do to repair the equity and the prosperity and sustainability in our health, we should know that who's mayor does matter. And so I would challenge each of us. I know none of you are in that category. You all vote.
Commissioner, I want to make sure we have time for questions.
Sure, absolutely. Need to get out and vote. Back to you, Alec.
Great, thank you. I'll turn it over to Lauren for the Q&A.
Great, thank you so much. Our first question is related to income qualifications for stabilized apartments. The question asks, would you support expanding income qualifications for rent stabilized apartments? NYCHA tenants already must submit to income qualification tests, but the rest of rent regulated tenants are not required to do the same.
Yeah, I think, you know, this is a scarce public good, and I think to exercise some scrutiny in terms of ensuring that folks meet the eligibility and the criteria, that's an important thing to enforce and to maintain the public trust and credibility.
Thank you. Next question is kind of a combination of a couple things. As we try and decrease congestion, increase our have a better impact on our environment, like to address your position on removing spaces for bus lanes and bikes, and in turn, how you plan to make sure that, or not make sure, depending on your response, that residents who need cars and live in the city can continue to do so as we see spaces diminish.
Yeah, that's a big challenge for sure. And I think that we absolutely must use this opportunity to take a systems approach to look at our transit, to look at our community spaces, both residential and public spaces and commercial spaces, through that systems lens. So for example, what other L-train solutions might there be? What other 14th Street bus solutions might there be that we just haven't looked at yet? We just haven't asked the question. You know, when I remember folks were so scared just a few years ago about the L train, and then, you know, the governor looked at it again and found a better solution. Same with the 14th Street bus. So I think when it comes to this issue of public space, transit, congestion, we have to keep everything on the table. Absolutely everything on the table. And I think that one of the ideas that came up a little earlier in terms of investing in affordable housing on the transit corridors, that's one such really good idea to make sure that we maximize that use. But we also have to make sure that we work together as a system, and that's going to take a very detailed and an engineering approach, really looking at our streets and figuring out where and how can we accommodate all that we want here in our city.
Great, thank you. We have time for one more question, since you did bring up the Lucerne, our current situation with homelessness. How do you plan to tackle the issue of homelessness as briefly as possible if you are elected mayor?
Sure, absolutely. Again, looking at this through a systems lens, where do homeless congregate? They congregate in our ERs, in our shelters, in our jails. And what we've got to do is we've got to create diversion, secure diversion programs, keep our seriously mentally ill out of our jails. We've got to be able to bring the Fountain House Clubhouse model to scale across the city. We've got to work and train social workers to work with the police, not to send out social workers instead of the police, but we also have to get community input, community buy-in. We have to make sure that we invest in the potential of each of our homeless individuals and get them back on track to a life full of purpose, passion, and meaning.
Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Alec,
Thank you.
I'll let you.
Great, thank you very much. We will close with our 8th candidate. I would like to introduce Maya Wiley, who is the former chair of the New York City Civilian Complaint Review Board and currently professor at the New School and analyst on MSNBC. Ms. Wiley, the floor is yours.
Thank you. And sorry, just making sure my video is running. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. And I too want to wish a happy birthday to Assemblymember Rosenthal. I didn't know, and I'm wishing you well. Let me just start by saying that I am running to be the next mayor of New York City because I know that this city, that our government, partnering with our people, can be one that becomes a city where we can all live with dignity. And dignity means many things, from being able to afford the rent, even the possibility of purchasing a home, knowing that we're safe in our streets, knowing that our wages and our work will be wages and work of dignity, and many other things. But let me tell you a little bit personally about myself and why this is so important to me, even personally and as a resident of this city. When I was a little girl, I actually lived in a Black neighborhood in DC, having moved from the Lower East Side of New York. And I did go to the segregated Black public school, and I did watch my neighborhood disappear from before my eyes, including my best friend, Charlene, who one day I could not find, and found out from my mother that the rent had been increased and that her mother, who was a cashier at the neighborhood grocery store, could not pay it. And for me, even as the child of activists, as folks who were active in the civil rights movement and the economic justice movement, for me, that was a personal experience around what I saw my parents working to advance. And so I came to Columbia Law School because I wanted to use what I had been given to make sure that we didn't see any other little girls who looked like my friend Charlene and me disappear. And New York for me represented that. It represented a city where we had everyone. You know, we have 800 language, 40% of our people foreign born, people descended from North American slaves, people with a big bank account, no bank account at all. We have it all, but we have been losing it. Now, obviously with COVID, we are in a historic crisis, and it is a crisis, however, that blew the curtain back on problems that we faced even before COVID and deepened them. And here's the opportunity. The opportunity is to take this crisis and not just recover from COVID, but to actually reimagine this city as one that retains what we love about it while we fix what produced too much indignity for too many of us. Now, for me, I was fortunate enough to spend literally 25 years working on these issues as a civil rights attorney, as someone who founded a national organization called the Center for Social Inclusion, where we named these things and called it structural racism, working on everything from education to food systems to the digital divide. And when Mayor de Blasio became mayor on a platform of ending income inequality, I, for one, was completely on board with that mission. I didn't know the man, but I did agree with the mission. And I was privileged to become and to be named the first Black woman to serve as a council to New York City mayor. And it was a something I'm deeply grateful for, because what it enabled me to do was see firsthand what I believed and knew, which is that city government can transform these systems, these things that my friends and neighbors faced when I was growing up, that we still see in this city, to face displacement. We can grow, but with ensuring that we retain what we love and who we love in this city. But it does require, and I saw it firsthand, and I was fortunate enough to able to do this in the context, for example, of universal broadband access. It requires government to think differently and to think about what it can do by partnering with itself, but also partnering externally to solve problems that are structural. So when I was given by the mayor universal broadband access and said, go do that, go figure that out, I didn't know how to do it. And frankly, very few people did, because very few cities have done it. But I found a way to find the revenue stream, to get in our capital construction budget for the first time a $70 million line for broadband, and to pull together agencies that did not generally work together on these issues or do this thing that I was now proposing, which was to give every single apartment in Queensbridge houses free broadband. And that's something government hadn't done before, and we got it done and laid out a plan to do that in more public housing. Now, I also saw where it falls down and where it gets broken. And yes, it does require leadership, and we don't always get it. So what I will say is a leadership that brings partnership, a leadership that recognizes possibility and all the resources that government has to bear to bring to its problems, and does something that we're doing right now in this campaign, which is having our first People's Assembly, where we are calling on New Yorkers to come together and be part of identifying exactly the transformational solutions that government can and must bring. And I will stop there to enable questions.
Thank you very much, Professor Wiley. First question that we have: would you support removing the NYPD commissioner's ability to downgrade discipline recommendations from the Civilian Complaint Review Board?
I believe we actually have to put the public back in public safety and ensure strong civilian oversight of police misconduct. That means we have to look at a complete restructure, including making sure we have the public, the civilian side, including a strong mayor, say what the policies and priorities of policing are. At the same time, that we ensure we have a fair disciplinary process, and the commissioner cannot determine solely what that discipline is. And so I actually think we have to reimagine and restructure policing altogether, top to bottom, and how we do civilian oversight as well.
Thank you. My next question, I've gotten a couple versions of these here. How do we move away from not in my backyard sentiment, particularly as it relates to homelessness in New York City?
Yeah, I think it starts from a very engaged process with residents, both that's transparent about what we're doing, why we're doing it, and that ensures that every community does its part, because that's what being a city and working together means. And a leadership in city government does is, we're going to talk about it and structure it. We're going to identify possible problems and ensure that everyone understands what we're building, how we're building it, and allows a voice and allows the opportunity for communities to raise concerns, to ask questions, and to understand how problems can be solved if they arise, and to truly be responsive to them when they do. I think we have lost so much trust in government, and it's something that we can build, but we have to do it by engaging our communities, by engaging our people, and being part of the solution.
Thank you. My next question for you is, how do you think we can use the $157 million allocated for broadband the most efficiently to provide these services in the 5 boroughs? I know we asked this earlier, but you brought up universal broadband, or you brought up broadband in Queensbridge houses. So I wanted to ask you this question.
Yeah. So let's start with the fact that that $157 million should absolutely be used to deploy free broadband where we know people can't get it, because it's not going to cover the entire city. And that does mean public housing residents, and ensuring that homeless families, first of all, have an apartment with a door and a key, and that they have service, because we know from COVID who was not able to take advantage of telemedicine, who was not able to take advantage sufficiently of online learning. So deploy those resources where they're needed most. But we have to leverage the city's, both its franchise authority. That's something city government's doing right now, is negotiating franchise agreements. Those agreements right now should include how we are going to close the digital divide by ensuring that we're leveraging that and creating more franchise opportunities, but also our city assets. We have city assets. We have private sector that wants access to them, but we shouldn't allow that to happen without deriving fees that we should get from it, so that we can put those resources into more public broadband, more public opportunities, and more public-private partnerships that increase access to those who can't pay $60, $75 a month and to get the service.
So I think we have time for one last question, which is, there are inefficiencies in our agencies that create and perpetuate inequities. Pick one, because we're short on time, inefficiency or equity that you would, you would reverse or roll back at the agency level. You could.
School nurses. So we have nurses in DOHMH, we have nurses at DOE. We desperately nursing services and more community-based healthcare. We have the opportunity to merge that and have that be a more, and ensure that we're getting all our Medicaid reimbursements. I've heard that's up to $500 million to $1 billion in money we're leaving on the table with an inefficient system we can streamline and make more effective for our folks.
Thank you, Professor Wiley.
Thank you.
Great. Well, I want to say a big thank you first to all of our candidates who joined us this evening. Eric Adams, Sean Donovan, Catherine Garcia, Carlos Menchaca, Diane Morales, Scott Stringer, Lori Sutton, and Maya Wiley. Please join me in thanking them. I, on behalf of the Westside Democrats, want to thank all of you for spending your Thursday evening with us. Big thanks to my co-hosts, Pablo Zavaios and Lauren Brody. And I just want to recognize the Westside Democrats my fellow district leaders, Joan Palo, Mark Landis, Janice Oppenheimer, Georgette Gittens, Josh Kinberg, Jason Haber, and Corey Haber. On behalf of all of us, thank you for joining the Westside Democrats for this event. Have a safe and happy Thanksgiving, everyone. Good night.